Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another English episode. Today we are extremely flattened and happy to have this amazing guest here, Mateus.
Yeah, today we have like a special guest, and I'm not gonna take too much time. Toby, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. My name is Toby, CTO of Tobiko Data, where we just launched our new product, SQLMesh. Before Tobiko Data, I led analytics at Airbnb, which included things like metrics. I redesigned the metrics platform called Minerva, as I also led the experimentation platform. And then before that, I led the experimentation team at Netflix. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, just the small companies, right? And yeah, I'm going to start off by saying, based on all your experience through this amazing and gigantic companies such as Netflix, Airbnb, and I know you did all the previous jobs on matter of the data spectrum as well. What do you see, as this data-driven culture? Because we have seen customers trying to understand a little bit about the data-driven, but are these companies needs to be data-driven if they would like to unlock data analytics and just really analyze their data and just get insights of it?
Yeah, so every company is different. Netflix and Airbnb have big data cultures, but I would say that they're different in terms of how much they respect data. I would say like Netflix is extremely data driven. Every decision undergoes A/B testing. Everything is very data driven. I think that's kind of part of the culture of the leadership team. I think Airbnb, they do a lot with data, but they're not quite as rigorous in terms of scientifically analyzing every change.
Okay, so even though they're big and they have like lots of data running through the pipeline, it's just like a little bit of behavior change in terms of how they deal with data, right?
Right. Airbnb is a little bit more designer focused. They have a
Mm,
designer led culture, and Netflix is a little bit more data driven.
I see. I see. And just based on that, what are the major pain points that you see, like big companies or even medium companies as well, that you work it for or you have acquaintance or acknowledgement regarding the data engineering job? What are the major pain points you see?
There are three big vectors of scale at these companies. There's big data, right? That's one vector. So you can have a lot of data. There's a lot of users, a lot of people, right? So as you have more people in your organization, more people making data, more people consuming data, that's another vector. And then you also have a lot of models, like so a lot, just a lot of code, right? And that's like another vector. And so at these kind of companies, you have all three. Netflix had huge amounts of data, lots of users, and lots of models. Maybe a little, not so much medium models. Airbnb had less data, lots of users, but many models. And so a little bit different, but they all three of these, oh, both of these companies kind of have these three vectors of scale.
Okay, so do you judge that these three vectors would be like the main uh, major pain points when you deal with massive data, right? Or just massive adoption of data or massive adoption or understanding about your customer, because as more data you have, it gets a little bit complex, right? It seems easier, but it gets a little bit complex to understand the customer behavior, right?
Not only that, but everything gets more complex, right? Your queries get more complex. Your processes get more complex. You have to make sure that you're not breaking something else someone else is doing, or there's just so much. As you add more things, right, everything just gets harder to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's not only tied up with the coding perspective, but also on the infrastructure, right? So it's all the different layers that get hit by this, augmentation of big data, people, and model. I like the way that you put it this because usually I don't see, I was not tackling that approach, but I like the approach to see as like vectors, like big data, people, and models. I totally
Yeah.
agree with that sentence. Pretty well spot on.
Great. And talking about something that the experience that you have been having to become founder of a new company, tell us the challenges, different from the technical stuff. Now you guys are building something and have a product that is the SQL Mesh. Can you tell us a little about the challenges of this new company?
Yeah, I've never done it before. It's my first time making a company. I've built open source projects before, but a company is a whole different ball game. It's been a lot of fun. I've been learning a lot, but I would say like in terms of kind of our strengths, our team is very engineering heavy. We all come from kind of FANG and we all very senior. And so that kind of part of it is pretty easy for us. The hardest part is that marketing is a big part of making a startup, especially when there's an existing incumbent that is huge, right? And so the biggest challenge for us is really in the marketing piece. How can we sell what we're doing? How can we get people to understand and respect what we're doing? How can we get people to think about us and talk about us? So that's
Yes.
really the biggest challenge for us.
No, but honestly, I think you guys started with the right foot. Because I mean, first impression, I've been in the data system for quite a while, and when I had my first, when I saw SQLMesh, it's just kind of actually I'm just with the open tab open here because I'm just doing some tests. And I've got a, I must say that we're gonna go for that, but I was kind of impressed with the how much abstractions you guys just put it in complex things like environments and just DAGs and stuff like that, how you guys abstract it in a way that would be easier to think about the business problem as being like the first class citizen instead of just focusing too much on the technology and forgetting a little bit about the business. And I think you guys are approaching that in the right way. Just think about the business and having some, predefined stuff that you guys are taking for granted that you consider as the, as the key points to be successful with data. And I think that we're looking at, we saw a lot of DevOps, but then this name arrived like the DataOps. Can you explain a little bit about what DataOps is and how it can help us data teams to build better, products?
Yeah, data ops is just kind of like a set of philosophies or processes to make people more efficient with data. So shipping faster, shipping safer, and shipping more often, right? And so, especially at the larger scales, when you have more people, you have more models, you have more data, it gets harder to do these things, right? And especially at some big companies or even some little companies, whenever you make a change in your data model to get a new metric or fix business logic, it can be dangerous, right? And you're not kind of sure what's going to happen. And so data ops is just making that easier, making that safer and faster.
Wow, that's. I mean, do we have Mateus that we know of about any data ops product that is doing that? Because I don't actually know something that does this end to end. So that's why SQL Mesh just pretty much caught me because I was like, okay, what DevOps, DataOps, they must be pretty much similar in terms of shipping faster and make things easier, right? A lot of abstractions being just done. And then for me, that's the very first product that intends or targets to do this massive, abstraction of complexity. But before you launch like Tobiko, um, do we have something regarding the data ops pretty much, inserted on the data engineering market?
I think data ops has existed as a term,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know of any real product that kind of came about it as we have. I think there's some work around observability. So
Uh-huh.
that's one part of data ops, observing the health of your pipelines, etc. But that's only one small part of it, right? I think that, for example, scheduling frameworks like Dagster and Prefect and Airflow try to solve another aspect of it, but it's pretty low level. So I don't know if anyone before us has made anything
That's why it's so
quite.
groundbreaking. That's why it's so groundbreaking. Yeah. So without SQL Mesh, there's a bunch of data ops difficulties like learning curve, roles, and as you said, abstraction of technologies, so on and so forth. And then I would like to jump and I would like to for you to, tell some comments regarding SQL Mesh and what is the target idea of SQL Mesh. Explain for the people, for the data engineers and data people that is listening to us, what SQL Mesh is.
So at its core, SQL Mesh is a transformation framework, and it allows you to write Python or SQL queries, and then we handle the rest, right? We handle the creation of the DAG, registration. We handle scalability of all that stuff, right? And so we kind of think of ourselves as the next generation of DBT, right? So DBT, as you're all familiar with, is kind of like a SQL transformation framework to make it easier for analysts to kind of write SQL and be productive. However, kind of the creation of SQLMesh happened when I was at Airbnb, right? I had actually never used DBT because, uh, DBT wouldn't have worked at a company like Airbnb. And I can explain kind of why that is in a bit. But I saw a demo of DBT and I was just like, wow, like, a tool like this is very valuable. However, I want it to work at any company, right? And so we built SQLMesh with that mindset, right? Coming from it like, okay, transformation frameworks are valuable. They make people more productive, but how can we do it in a way that will work at any company at any scale?
Wow. Yeah,
I mean,
that's impressive.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess let me explain like why DBT wouldn't work at a company like
Perfect. Yeah. Would be nice.
So if you just use DBT out of the box, right? You just do DBT run, right? And so let's say you have a bunch of models and you want to make a change, right? The default approach would be just to do like DBT run, and that's going to fully refresh everything, your whole project. Now, if you're at a company like Airbnb, you have maybe 30,000 models and terabytes or petabytes of data. You're not going to be able to refresh your whole warehouse, right? Now, certainly, you can now use a bunch of advanced features that no one uses, like state and defer, etc., right? But this is very complex and error prone, right? And so I wanted the ability for a person at these companies to be able to just make the change at any scale and to be able to recreate a dev environment for very little cost, right? And so kind of the key innovation of SQLMesh is really with the virtual environments, right? Because with a virtual environment, a user can make a change. We can understand the whole dependency of what has changed and then only change that, right? And then we use this abstraction with views pointing to the physical layer. So when you make a dev environment, it's complete. It's got your whole warehouse except for the changes you have, right? And being able to do that like quickly and cheaply is super powerful.
Yeah, it is indeed. And hopefully people can understand the complexity that lies underneath these layers and how you guys are making it easier for people to use. And plus, it's completely open source, which is mind blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. You can say.
One more big thing like with SQLMesh that I wanted to highlight is like incremental models, right? Like incremental models is a necessity when you're at any company with scale, right? It's just unfeasible to backfill your whole warehouse every day. If you get views or impressions every day, you only want to process that, right? And so with DBT, you can do incremental models. However, they kind of label it as a complex feature. And the reason why it's complex as a DBT user is because it's up to you, right? You have to do an if-else macro. If incremental do this, else do that. You have to then like do your own subquery, right? And another big problem with the way DBT does incremental models is that it expects you to be able to run the whole data set fresh the first time. And actually, that's not possible with a lot of the systems that I've worked with, right? You have to batch up the incremental loads. So maybe only loading 1 week at a time, right? And so one of the additional core things that I wanted with SQLMesh was for you to be able to define an incremental model easily, right? And for SQLMesh to understand which intervals have run. So if you're working with Airflow as an example, Airflow was designed in this way. Airflow is very partition based, right? And so is SQLMesh. So SQLMesh has a first-class understanding of time. It tracks all of that. And so when you define an incremental model in SQLMesh, you don't have to write any subqueries. You just have to do like select all from my table where the date is between the start and the end. And SQLMesh handles start and end. It keeps track of the start and end, and then it can then from there parallelize everything, make sure there's no data leakage, making sure everything is consistent, etc.
Wow. So basically, you have incremental as the first class citizen of the entire process.
Exactly, yeah.
That's interesting. Wow. And as you said, I truly don't see systems production workload based. They're not being like incremental, right? I mean, just majority of the data warehouses, they do incremental. So yeah, just having this as a flag as being major and being main capability is just outstanding, truly.
Yeah, and people who are listening to us, that they must be asking themselves, and I have two questions for you, Toby. The first one is how I can deploy this in my infrastructure. Is how easy it is, and one of the things that usually the management always ask when we're using something new, what is the culture changes that we must be careful of when deploy, what we have to, how we can fully use the capability of the tool that we're installing in our company.
Sure. So SQLMesh is easy to use. Basically, you can just pip install it, right? It's all open source, it's all free. And you can get started really quickly because SQLMesh works with DuckDB as well, right? And so you can get started really fast. Now, if you wanted to use SQLMesh in a production setting, we support Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, etc. But for like the kind of enterprise solution, if you want to do it kind of how the top companies do it, we have first-class Airflow support. So basically, you can point your SQLMesh and have everything run through Airflow. And so another big difference between SQLMesh and DBT is that SQLMesh treats treats Airflow as a first-class citizen. So it's not just a black box where you just do SQLMesh run inside of a node, right? It actually understands your DAG and then creates nodes inside Airflow. And so that you can manage things much better in Airflow, and you can even hook up to external dependencies much easier. So that's kind of how you kind of get started. I know there's also documentation to do quick start, etc. But to answer your question, what kind of cultural changes are needed? I think there's a lot there. I think one part of it is like, we have a CI/CD bot that we plan to open source very soon. And so that'll make things kind of much more robust for people. It's not just kind of, you're just running your project willy-nilly. We really want to tie your code to your data, right? So with the CI/CD bot, we're trying to make it so that whatever's in main is a true reflection of what is actually in your data warehouse, right? And so that's kind of like one cultural shift. Another cultural shift, which I personally think is very important, is unit tests, right? SQLMesh has first-class unit tests. So basically, you define kind of fake data or fixtures in like YAML, and then we can then run your existing models and then verify that against a fixed output, right? So these are very fast, very quick, and they validate business logic, right? And so this can run in your CI, and so whenever someone makes a change, you can be more confident that they haven't broken anything, right? Like, so DBT has what they call tests, but we call them audits. So they're really just data quality checks, right? They check nulls and etc., right? So those are good, and we have those as well, but they're really for checking big things, right? Make sure your data quality is good or your upstream hasn't changed, but they don't validate business logic, right?
Yeah.
So that's another big cultural shift that we're trying to change as well. The practice of actually testing data.
Yeah, and just considering this as one of the main pillars of the entire SQLMesh, right? Not having as additional step, but just considering as a main pillar of the entire SQLMesh paradigm.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I have seen a lot of posts getting out regarding the SQLMesh, and just as you stated, the EMS, it's a major breakthrough. It's a major thing for people to realize how cool it is to have their own data warehouse and dev, and just being able to understand the difference between production and dev and just only capture the differentials. The DAG generation, so it handles everything as a first-class citizen on Airflow. Considering any other orchestration tooling regarding Airflow, is there any consideration around that? Like, as you said, Dagster or something like this, it's on the roadmap?
Yeah, we'd love to eventually integrate with Dagster and Prefect, but we're quite a small team, and so it's a matter of priorities for us. And so the answer is yes, we want to support Dagster and Prefect, but we don't have the bandwidth right now.
Yeah. Also, I saw something pretty cool. I mean, you guys are building and giving to the community a UI, right? And we don't have this capability on DBT, for example. This is one of the things for DBT Core. We can do that, but it's just kind of, CLI-ish, which is not a problem but for data analysts, for example, they would like they would love to have like a UI where they can tap SQL and just do all the stuff in one place. So can you tell a little bit about this UI?
Yeah, so our UI is open source and free. And the idea with that is that we wanted to make SQLMesh easy for everybody, right? So it's SQL. We feel like SQLMesh is powerful enough for the data engineer and the platform engineer, right? They're going to really love the features, but at the end of the day, the analyst kind of just wants to run SQL and they just want to get their changes in. And so the UI is really there to make it easy, make it an easy experience, and provide them all the guardrails and safety features of SQLMesh, but in a way that's easy for them to interact with. And so we feel like the IDE was a very important part of our open source offering.
It is. It is. Truly it is.
Yeah, great. And what we can expect, Toby, for next steps of SQLMesh for this year and the next? What you guys are thinking, okay, this is like priority for us. We must have this for this year or maybe next year as a feature, as a new time of deployment, whatever you guys are thinking of with SQLMesh.
So in terms of kind of the big features that we're thinking about doing, so my background and a lot of the team's background is on metrics and experimentation. And so the reason why we did kind of transformation and ETLs first is because you need a solid transformation framework before you can do metrics, because metrics with bad data is useless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the next 6 to 9 months, we plan to expand SQLMesh to be the full semantic layer as well. But not just business metrics, right? With my experience in experimentation, I really wanted to make sure that SQLMesh computes metrics in a way that's compatible with inference and machine learning, right? So like experimentation metrics, they're just much more complex than normal business metrics, right? You have to keep track of additional statistics. You have to do things in a certain way. But if you can solve experimentation, then you can also solve analytics at the same time.
Okay. I see your point. So
Great.
that's gonna be like the focus for I would say the quarter, the Q1 and Q2 as well on this year, right? Just chasing like
This quarter is really about solidifying our product, making sure that, we're brand new. We've only been at it for about 7 months now. So we want to make sure that we can handle transformations well. So we'll be spending this quarter kind of making it more robust. As an example, like I just recently launched multi-repo support, right? So SQLMesh can work even if you have different projects, different repositories, right?
wow, I didn't know that. Okay,
Oh yeah,
that's
I just
cool.
added that like right. And so like if you have a really big project and you want to split it up, you can. Now, one of the really cool things about the multi-repo project for SQLMesh is that you can actually backfill other people's stuff, right? Because it's a whole graph, right? Even if you have multiple projects, they might depend on some of your stuff. And in order to get that full preview environment, right, you can't just build your project because then you're going to be missing the downstream, right? And so even though you don't have their project checked out, you can actually backfill it and make the world consistent.
Wow. Okay, meaning that we can sync up or line up with the timeline, right? So everyone can be lined up and just be in charge of the downstream resources also. And this is one of the, to be honest, the most or one of the most problems that we see nowadays on the data engineering side is that there's so many downstreams, there are so many people that consume for that specific data set or for that specific ETL that you did or ELT that sometimes it's pretty hard to keep up. And SQLMesh can understands that, right? So this is pretty much magic in what we have seen like in the trenches. One of the key features that is missing from technologies that even Airflow, right? Because you can see what is happening on the DAG, but you don't have the clear visibility about the whole. And with SQLMesh, it sits on top of that, so you're going to be able to see everything that is happening through that specific pipeline that you just established on SQLMesh.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I don't know if I talked about this, but like one of the core things that we do in order for that to actually work well is with like understanding the SQL and then having this automatic categorization. Are you familiar with like the non-breaking and breaking changes?
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, so SQLMesh, as I said, has a first-class understanding of SQL, right? So we can actually understand the SQL. Now, what SQLMesh does is it actually can parse the SQL and understand like what it means. And so, for example, let's say you have a model and it has many dependencies downstream. And then you add a column to the model, right? That no one else uses. This is a non-breaking change, right? Because no one else is using your stuff, right? But if you did it naively and you want to make things consistent, you just backfill the whole world, right? But SQLMesh understands that all you've done is added a column. You haven't changed anything else. And then it can automatically then categorize your change as non-breaking. And so it would not backfill the downstream.
Whoa, automatically?
Automatically.
Whoa.
But if you had a column that was like 1 + 1, and then you change it to 1 + 2, it would say, hey, that's a breaking change. And then it'd be like, in order for you to be consistent, you need to backfill yourself and anyone downstream.
My goodness. And this is open source. Oh my goodness. So that's, yeah, because I mean, for people that is listening to us, it's complex to do this, right? It's just pretty complex to do this type of stuff. And just being like SQLMesh doing this transparently is just like crazy. I'm just feeling like, oh my God, I have to stop everything that I'm doing, just fully test. Because I just did the getting started and just worked well. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so shocked and impressed. But there's so much more about it. And what are the possibilities that just kind of become endless. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, before we go to the fourth board, I only have one question about the SQLMesh that we have to add here. And people must be thinking the same as myself. And Toby, there's some particular case that you say, okay, this professional, this person, or this company come to me, give me like a use case that's not quite usual for SQLMesh, and say, okay, this use case, guys, you're not supposed to use SQLMesh for this. What's your recommendation on that?
SQLMesh is not really designed for low latency real-time applications. So we support micro batching. So for example, if you want to run your pipelines every 5 minutes, we have support for that. But if you're looking for like sub-second latency and making like a real-time streaming application, you should not use SQLMesh.
Good.
Great.
But yeah, 5 minutes is, I mean, and that's a curiosity, just, I know that Netflix is pretty much event driven, like real time fashion, but I know that they have like this big offline systems where they do a bunch of stuff. How much of the companies that have gone through like Airbnb, Netflix, and the other ones, and I know that have been, just dealing with a lot of customers, how much you would say that SQLMesh would fit? How much percentage? Because I think 5 minutes is just like pretty super decent for.
Yeah, it's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, especially for backfilling or just doing incremental loads on your data warehousing. Come on, 5 minutes. It's just like,
Exactly. It's good. Yeah, so from my experience, if you can have micro batching in 5 minutes, even an hour latency, it's like fine, right?
Yeah.
And every company basically has kind of a batch computation framework. I don't know I haven't talked to many companies or any at all yet that only do everything streaming. It's just hard to manage. It's hard to backfill, hard to make changes, right?
Yeah.
So even at Netflix, most of their analytics was done batch, right? They only use streaming for like real-time deployments and observability. But it was a challenge, right? Because at Netflix, you have this huge batch pipeline, which is used to make real decisions, right? And then you have to kind of duplicate all of this logic in real time. And it gets inconsistent, right? Because you can't do all the things you can do in real time, like
Exactly.
joins,
Spot on.
etc. So, real time, honestly, I would avoid it if you don't have to do it. I think 5 minute batch, or even an hour batch, perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I truly agree with that statement, because I see a lot of people talking about real time, and we do advocate about real time, but there's a specific use case for that. And also,
Exactly.
I don't see, honestly, I don't see any customer that does like streaming that do not do batch. But all of the customers initially do batch and later they go into the stream or not. But the true reality is the data analytics, that's at least my experience from the field. The data engineering, the machine learning, and all of the training stuff, it happens on the data lake, on the batch side of stuff. It doesn't happen in real time. You don't train the model in real time, right? You train them in batch, you just verify the quality of that, and then just move to streaming. So streaming is just becoming truly mainstream for some use cases, but I don't see like I don't see truly a data warehousing being fed up in like millisecond latency, because we have to have some data quality rules. You have to understand the data. You have to break it down data into dimensions and fact. And there's like process that needs to happen, that needs to gracefully happen step by step. So you're going to have, batching in 5 minutes is just so decent. I think that even 1 hour or more than that is just still super decent for a data warehousing to keep up with the data.
Exactly.
Yep, let's go to the fourth block and to talk about the Tobiko data. And that's something that I'd like to ask you, Toby. What is the main idea when you guys come up? Okay, let's build this company. What are you guys targeting to do with your company?
We're looking to make data easy for everybody at any scale, right? Across those three vectors. So if you have a lot of users, a lot of models, or a lot of data, and even if you don't, we want to be valuable, right? Because even if you're a small company, if you have small data, SQL Mesh is going to save you time, right? Maybe it takes you only 5 minutes to do a full refresh, right? That's still 5 minutes you're wasting every single time you're doing a full refresh, right? And so we feel like if we can make that process easy and seamless, then everybody wins, except for maybe the snowflake who's making a killing off of the inefficiencies of the current state of the world.
Yeah, but you said something well, I mean, regarding, even for small companies or, but eventually these companies, they can just become like medium and eventually small. And guess what? They don't need to change the entire tool set, because if they're using SQL Mesh, it's going to be transparent for them, right? You guys use their
Right.
flow, you guys use Databricks, APIs, BigQuery, or even if the customer would like to change between technologies, SQL Mesh is going to do this transparently. So it's going to be better for
Yeah.
them to make the choice, right? You don't have to change your whole chain of tool sets to adapt to new volumes of data, or these three new vectors that the three vectors that you said.
Right. I guess one thing that I didn't mention that you kind of brought up is like, yeah, if you want to change your stack, SQL Mesh can do that because SQL Mesh is built on top of SQL Glot, which is my open source transpiler, SQL parser and transpiler. And so if you write all your queries in BigQuery, we can then just seamlessly transpile that and run that in Snowflake or whatever, right?
Come on,
So
that's
that helps with that as well.
that's insane. So it understands that you change the technology and then adapt the SQL to run on that specific engine.
That's right.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
And so like that started because at Netflix and Airbnb, everyone's using Spark for the batch pipelines, but then we use Presto for quick querying and Druid, right? And so the data scientist doesn't want to have to write the query twice, and so that's really why I started SQL Glot, right? Was to make that transition seamless.
Ooh, I didn't know that as well.
Yeah.
Wow, what a class.
And in what are the products that you guys have? Like what type of services that you guys are offering for your customers? Can you tell a little bit about, besides SQL Mesh, what other products that you guys have and what you guys offer as a service?
So we just started 7 months ago. Our two products are SQL Mesh and SQL Glot. We've got a lot of work to do on SQL Mesh, and so we're really going to be focusing on making that good and building out a kind of a cloud enterprise product for SQL Mesh, right?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. And I also saw that you guys started your journey also, just pretty much trusting on the community and just receiving lots of comments and lots of things from the community. Tell me a little bit about how has been this experience between just working alongside. I know that you already have some open source products, but how it is this feeling to work so close to the community?
Yeah, it's great. As a company and personally, I really believe in open source, right? Even before SQL Mesh, before SQL Plot, I actually made a board game website called 18xx.games. It's this like hardcore economic train simulation game. It's open source, right? And that project was really successful because the community got involved, right? I have dozens and dozens of contributors creating many, many games. And so I really believe in this open source model. And so we have only been at it for a couple months, as I said, and we wanted to launch SQLMesh as fast as possible because I wanted to make sure that the community could see it, play with it, and give us feedback because I don't want to build something in isolation for 2 years and then come out with something that no one wants. I want people to criticize it. I want people to tell me I'm wrong, right? And that's how we're going to grow. And so, community is a huge part of it. It's everything, right? Everything the community asks, we're going to listen to, right? And so, one of our kind of philosophies with dealing with community is to be very responsive. So, if you make an issue on GitHub, we will respond very quickly and try to address it, right? And so, that's kind of one of our kind of philosophies with dealing with open source.
That's nice. That's nice. And I think as my last question for today's episode is going to be, what do you envision for the new feature on the data engineering, on the data team spectrum? I know the SQLMesh is going to play the major role, so this is the intent to having SQLMesh out there, and I truly think, honestly, so first, thank you so much for accepting to be at the podcast, because I saw SQLMesh and I understood the idea, and I said, well, definitely people, not only from the English, but we have to open up more to people from Portuguese, which have a big community. Trust me, it's big here. Sometimes you don't have this much visibility, but I can tell you that South America, it's gigantic in terms of products, in terms of adoption, in terms of community-wise. And what we usually do is that we just speak this English, we do a summary in Portuguese, and also we just speak we translate the subtitles in Portuguese, and we try to release this to our community. So this way they can listen for you, the creator, about how SQLMesh is important and the companies that it went through. But what would be your gut feeling regarding the next 2 to 3 years on the data spectrum? What do you think is going to happen? It's really tough, right? But what do you foresee?
I'm not very good at making these predictions.
But you can try now, and then after 2 years, you can just listen again.
I think data will continue to be fragmented. I think there will be many tools for everything, because data is complicated and not every solution is going to work for every company. It's not a one size fits all. I think that Databricks and Snowflake will continue to be big players in this space. I think that the next kind of big thing that I'm looking into is like really fast analytic engines, like you have StarRocks, ClickHouse, Doris, etc. Right, making aggregations and join really fast, right? I don't know, man.
Those are fine. Those are fine because just don't get me wrong. I'm still think that Snowflake and Databricks are going to be. We have seen a lot of customers moving away from the cloud provider structure and just moving to a data platform like Snowflake and just Databricks. But also, I'm seeing like with the SQLMesh, released, I'm seeing for the very first time on the data engineering ecosystem a tool that can reduce the complexity of the toolings and focus on what needs to be done. dbt started with that, in my opinion. I think they just did a pretty nice shot in terms of reducing a little bit this friction from analysts or people that write SQL and then eventually Python now. But it doesn't offer the whole complete solution, right? So SQLMesh goes on top of that and offers like this amount of stuff. Question regarding that. So are you guys targeting to have ClickHouse on the integration side? Because this is something that I'm looking forward, to be honest. It's on the roadmap somewhere this year, next year. Okay.
ClickHouse is not on the roadmap.
Okay.
And people don't really do ETLs in ClickHouse. However, I could see like ClickHouse as being a part of the semantic layer.
Mm-hmm.
So basically having SQLMesh control the ETLs of your transformations, but then storing that into ClickHouse and then providing abstraction on top of ClickHouse to get summary statistics very quickly.
Gotcha.
So that in particular I could see, but I don't really see using ClickHouse as an ETL engine.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it does. It does. It does. I was looking more as like a data warehousing system where you can just throw queries against it, but not from the ETL portion of it. Because, for
Yeah.
example, for customers that are open source, for example, we don't have Snowflake or Databricks SQL, right? And one of the good things that we can do on Kubernetes or can install and deploy it is ClickHouse because it offers like either batch in real time and offers you like this pretty nice ANSI SQL standards, which Pinot or Druid doesn't offer. It's a little bit limited. And if you would like, you have to have Trino, for example, to do this. And then we ended up
Mhm.
with 2 deployments. So I think ClickHouse is going to be like one of the things that's going to, just pretty much gain traction, my opinion.
So I think if you're into this space, you should really check out StarRocks. I mean, from all of the benchmarks that I did working at Airbnb with my team, StarRocks just blows ClickHouse out of the water.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's not even close. Like ClickHouse, ClickHouse doesn't have a cost-based optimizer, or at least
Uh-huh.
it didn't when it. And so like you had to manually do your join orders, right? And if you're joining many big tables together, join order is very important, right? And so StarRocks has a cost-based optimizer and can join things much faster. And in terms of ingest, like ClickHouse couldn't ingest Airbnb's data. It didn't scale, right? StarRocks did it in like a couple hours.
Oh my goodness. What?
Additionally, like ClickHouse's SQL syntax is too obscure. It's not standard at all. For example, they have a lot of functions that need to be case sensitive. It's really annoying. They have a bunch of hints that you have to put in your SQL in order to tell ClickHouse to do the right thing. And so that all those reasons pushed Airbnb to basically eliminate ClickHouse from contention.
Okay, that's a pretty nice info that you didn't know it. So
Yeah.
yeah, actually, to be honest, I'm just we are usually pretty good in terms of knowing all the ecosystem, but I never heard about Starbucks. That's good to know. Interesting. It's open source, right?
Yeah, it is. I think they recently moved from Elastic to Apache. Uh, you probably haven't heard of it because it's a Chinese company, but they were based on another Apache project called
Oh
Doris.
yeah, I know Doris. Yeah, I know
Oh,
Doris.
you know Doris.
Yeah, I know Doris.
Okay.
I've tried to find someone to speak with Doris, but it turns out that I didn't find anyone on LinkedIn Alive or something like that. So it's just like MySQL all analytics work version of
Exactly.
it, right?
So
But it works
Star Rocks
pretty
is a fork
fantastic.
of Doris. Yeah,
Okay.
Star Rocks is a fork of Doris.
Okay. Interesting. Gotcha. Okay, good to know. Yeah, and I think that this is pretty much what we have. I just want to thank you so much, Toby, for your time. I know that you're just a lot of things to do on your plate, and hopefully, I would like to see more and more releases coming up from the SQL Mesh. We are kind of, eager to do some YouTube lives and some demonstrations and some workshops on our end about SQL Mesh. And once we're done, obviously I'm gonna ping you and just let you know, because I don't have any doubts that people are gonna love it and the adoption is gonna be pretty massive because people is gonna understand how easy it is to do it and how much complexity it get rid of the data engineering burden, right? So it just remove the burden of for the data engineers. And thank you so much. I'm gonna pass to Mateus.
Yeah, was what a class I can say. What a great time. Thanks, Toby, for sharing your knowledge to bring some much content to the table. And I hope to see more about SQL Mesh
Yeah,
on the next episodes.
me too.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's great chatting with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see if it takes off.
Let's see. Yes. Thank you so much, man.